"You are no longer useful to us," my boss laughed after 8 years of putting everything into my work. I smiled politely and handed over my laptop. While they escorted me out, I said, "Good luck with the investor tomorrow without me." As the elevator's doors closed, I watched the countdown begin. System failure in 9 minutes. 8 years. That's how long I gave to Ash Ridge Solutions. 8 years of early mornings, late nights, missed holidays, and skipped birthdays. I was their top systems architect, the one they called when everything was on fire. And somehow, I always found a way to put the flames out. But on a cloudy Wednesday afternoon, all I got in return was a cold smile and 6 words that changed everything. "Your services are no longer needed." My name is Tessa Monroe, and this is the story of how they tried to erase me and how I made sure the world would never forget me instead. It began like any other day. I'd spent the morning reviewing the latest integration reports for NexusCore, the AI-driven operations platform I had designed from scratch. It was finally ready, stable, smart, and days away from its investor launch. Months of sleepless nights had gone into fine-tuning every line of code. This wasn't just a product. It was my legacy. Around 3:15 p.m., I received an email marked urgent. A meeting with Charles, the CEO and Human Resources. No subject line, no context. That's when my chest tightened. I grabbed my laptop and walked down the glass hallway. On my left, the development lab still buzzed with the soft of servers, my servers. The ones I built and configured to run our core infrastructure. On my right, I passed the framed photos of company milestones. Every photo included Charles. None included me, despite the fact that I had been there for every single one. I entered the conference room where Charles sat at the head of the table, fingers steepled, eyes gleaming with the kind of smugness only a man who thinks he's won something could wear. Beside him sat Margaret from HR. She didn't look at me. "Tessa," Charles began, like he was reading off a script. "We appreciate everything you've contributed. But we've decided to take the company in a new direction. Effective immediately, your role is being dissolved. No warning. No gratitude. Just corporate jargon, layered over betrayal." I kept my face still. I had learned long ago that silence unsettles people more than rage. "Of course," I said evenly. "Would you like my laptop now?" Margaret blinked, surprised at my calm. "Yes," Charles said with a satisfied nod. "That would be ideal." I placed it gently on the table and stood. 2 security guards were already waiting outside the door. As they flanked me, I turned to Charles one last time. "Good luck with the investor meeting tomorrow," I said with a small smile. "Without me." He raised an eyebrow. "We'll manage." I smiled wider. "Let's hope so." As the elevator doors closed, I watched Charles disappear behind the brushed steel, and then the countdown began. System failure in 9 minutes. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that NexusCore had a built-in integrity fail-safe triggered only if my credentials were removed from the system. A final line of defense. Not to destroy it, but to protect it. Because I had learned the hard way that the most dangerous threats don't come from outside attacks. They come from inside. From people like Charles. People who smile as they take what isn't theirs. 6 months ago, I'd noticed strange server pings late at night when no one was supposed to be logged in. Files being copied, logs being altered. I traced them back to an account tied to Charles's executive assistant. I kept quiet and started building an invisible security shell around the core system, something no one else could see, let alone understand. It wasn't sabotage. It was insurance. They thought they were cutting me out, but they were cutting out the only person who understood how NexusCore really worked. The elevator opened to the lobby. I walked out carrying a single cardboard box, photos, a potted succulent, and a USB drive that held nothing they would expect but everything they needed. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised because betrayal, when you've seen it coming, doesn't sting the same way. Outside, the sky had darkened, mirroring the storm brewing inside Ash Ridge Solutions. And while they toasted their short-lived victory upstairs, 9 minutes ticked down toward the moment they'd realized what they had really lost. The architect, the brain, the one who built everything, and the only one who could fix what was about to break. 9 minutes, that's all it took. At minute 1, the system registered a critical authentication error. By minute 3, internal processes began to loop. At minute 6, the dashboard started flooding with anomalies. Nexus Core's AI flagged multiple subsystems as unstable. Red warning boxes blinked on every engineer's screen. And by minute 9, the platform crashed. Not just a typical crash, the kind of meltdown that made even the bravest IT leads freeze in horror. Investors were scheduled to view the demo the next morning, but the system was in total disarray with no clear way to bring it back online. I imagine the moment Charles realized what had happened, how the smile slipped from his face, how the illusion of control shattered, but I wasn't there to see it. Instead, I sat on the couch in my small apartment, sipping chamomile tea like nothing had happened. The television played some reality dating show I barely paid attention to. I let the background noise fill the silence while I stared at my phone. Nothing yet. But then, at exactly 5:12 p.m., it rang. Unknown number. I already knew who it would be. "Tessa, it's me," came a rushed voice. It was Eli, Ashridge's lead systems engineer, one of the few people at the company I actually respected. "You didn't hear this from me, but the system's down. Completely. Charles is freaking out. They think it's sabotage." I smiled. "And what do you think, Eli?" "I think you built something too smart to be handled like that. And I think Charles is finally learning what happens when you burn the person who holds everything together." He hesitated. "They're going to call you," he said quietly. "They need you." And he was right. 10 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time, it was Rachel, Charles's assistant. "Charles would like to speak with you," she said, her voice unusually stiff. "It's urgent. A car will be sent to pick you up within the hour." I almost laughed. "Tell him I'm busy," I replied. "Maybe tomorrow." A pause. "Tessa, please." That please was everything. It told me they weren't just inconvenienced. They were terrified. Nexus Core wasn't just a product. It was the entire foundation of their investor pitch, their valuation, their future. And now it was broken, unusable. I stood and went to my desk, opening a small drawer where I kept a sleek black USB drive, the one that held the key, not to sabotage, but to stability. See, what Charles and the board never understood was that Nexus Core wasn't just another piece of software. It was built with ethical protocols, a dynamic intelligence designed to adapt, but only under the guidance of authorized trusted inputs. I had embedded a central logic framework deep in the core. Trust must be earned. Credentials can be revoked. Loyalty cannot be faked. When they removed me from the system, they triggered a breach of protocol. The AI interpreted the removal of its architect, me, as a potential hostile event, and it responded exactly as it was programmed to do: protect itself. Quarantine suspicious commands, shut down dangerous inputs. By 7 p.m. another call came, this time from Charles himself. "Tessa," he said, trying to sound calm. "We've had an unexpected hiccup. I think there's been some kind of authentication bug." "A bug?" I repeated, feigning concern. "Yes, we'd like your help in resolving it," I said, pretending to think. "Is this a freelance gig, or am I back on payroll?" Silence. Then he sighed. "We can discuss that when you're here." I made him wait another hour before I agreed to come. When I arrived at Ashridge headquarters, the place was in chaos. Engineers running back and forth, alarms still flashing on monitors, and the tense buzz of desperation in the air. Charles met me in the executive boardroom, his tie loosened, hair disheveled. The image of a man who just lost everything but hadn't realized yet that he was lucky I even showed up. "Can you fix it?" he asked. I pulled the USB from my coat pocket and set it gently on the polished mahogany table. "I can," I said calmly, "but we need to talk first." He narrowed his eyes. "You think you're in a position to negotiate?" I leaned forward, voice steady. "I know I am." Because in that moment, the power had shifted. I wasn't just the woman they discarded. I was the key to the thing they had gambled their entire future on, and I had no intention of handing it back for free. Charles stared at the USB drive like it might explode. "This contains the fix?" he asked, voice tight. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch long enough for him to squirm. His foot tapped impatiently under the table. His jaw clenched like he was chewing on glass. "It contains the protocol update," I said at last. "The system is functioning exactly as designed, but it no longer recognizes you or anyone at Ashridge as a trusted authority." Charles scoffed. That's absurd. We own it. We paid for its development. I gave a soft, humorless laugh. You paid for a product. You didn't pay for understanding, and you sure as hell didn't pay for loyalty. His face reddened, but he didn't argue. He couldn't. He knew he'd lost the upper hand. I stood and walked slowly to the window overlooking the city skyline. From up here, Ashridge looked powerful, imposing, but I knew better. I'd seen how fragile the foundation really was. I gave you 8 years, I said quietly, and you tossed me out like I was nothing. No warning, no meeting, not even a thank you. Charles didn't respond. I turned to face him. You didn't just fire me. You removed the person who built your entire infrastructure without the decency of a conversation. And now, the very system you wanted to showcase to your investors doesn't trust you. Tell me, Charles, how do you think that looks from the outside? He flinched just slightly. Enough for me to know the reality had finally sunk in. Tell me what you want, he muttered. There it was, the shift I'd been waiting for. I want full recognition as Nexus Corp's lead architect, I said calmly, my name on every document, every patent, every press release. You make me a ghost. I make your system vanish. Fair trade. Charles swallowed hard. What else? 25% equity in the platform, I continued, retroactively vested. And a seat on the board. His eyes widened. You're out of your mind. The board will never, they will, if they want their investors to show up tomorrow, I interrupted. Because without that update, you don't have a demo. You have a very expensive failure. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly through his nose like a bull trying not to charge. For a moment, he was silent, weighing his options. You planned this, he said at last, eyes narrowing. You set us up? No, I said. I protected what I built. Another long pause. Then, finally, he gave a slow nod. I'll need it in writing, I added. You'll have it by morning, he muttered. No, I said firmly. Tonight, before I hand over anything. His gaze sharpened. You don't trust me? I smiled. You fired me. We stared at each other across the boardroom table, a silent war being fought in expressions and posture. Eventually, he stood up and motioned to Rachel, who had been quietly waiting outside the glass door. Call legal, he said. Now. It took 3 hours. They drafted the paperwork, emailed it to my attorney, made the necessary edits, and returned it with digital signatures. I didn't even blink when Charles tried to reduce my equity from 25 to 20 in the third draft. I simply stood, took the USB, and walked toward the door. If the paperwork doesn't match exactly what we discussed, I said, pausing with my hand on the doorknob, the system will stay down, and so will your company. Rachel handed me the corrected version 5 minutes later. With the contract now legally binding, I returned to the table and pushed the USB drive toward him. This will restore system trust protocols and reinstate full function, I said. But it'll also initiate an oversight loop that reports all administrative changes back to me. From now on, if you try to sideline me again, Nexus Core will know, and it will act accordingly. Charles looked at the drive as if it had just grown fangs, but he didn't argue. He simply nodded and whispered, Understood. I turned to leave, my heels echoing on the cold marble floor. Just before I reached the elevator, Charles called out, Tessa. I paused. You could have burned us to the ground, he said quietly. Why didn't you? I glanced over my shoulder. Because I didn't build Nexus Core to destroy things. I built it to protect them, including myself. And with that, the elevator doors closed once again, but this time, I wasn't being escorted out in disgrace. This time, I was ascending. The next morning, I walked into Ashridge Solutions through the front door. Not with a visitor badge, not flanked by security, but as a returning architect with a signed agreement in hand, and a digital trail of my reinstatement filed with HR before dawn. People looked up from their desks as I passed. Some surprised, some cautious, others visibly relieved. Eli greeted me near the dev pit with a look that said everything he couldn't say out loud. You really did it, he whispered. I'm not here for revenge, I replied. I'm here to make sure no one touches Nexus Core without understanding what they're holding. But the truth was, I didn't entirely believe that. There was a part of me that did want revenge, maybe not in fire and fury, but in recognition, in being seen. After 8 years of invisibility, There was a certain thrill in walking the halls like I belonged there and knowing that everyone else now knew it too. Charles didn't look at me during the investor demo. He gave the usual corporate spiel: future of automation, adaptive security, scalable intelligence. But when he introduced Nexus Core, his tone shifted. "And now," he said, forcing a practiced smile, "I'd like to introduce the system's original architect, our CO lead developer and strategic advisor, Tessa Munro." There it was. Not just a mention, but a title. Acknowledgement. Validation. The room full of investors turned their attention to me as I walked to the front. "Good morning," I began. "What you're about to see isn't just a platform. It's a system designed to think, adapt, and most importantly, protect. Not just against external threats, but internal ones. Nexus Core isn't reactive. It's predictive. And above all, it remembers who helped build it." That line earned a few raised eyebrows. I didn't care. I wasn't there to be subtle. We ran the demo. Nexus Core neutralized 5 complex simulated threats in real time. No errors, no delays, not even a flicker. After the final test case completed, the room erupted into excited murmurs. A few investors approached Charles already discussing numbers. Others came to me directly asking about scalability, expansion, partnerships. For once, they saw the brain behind the brilliance, not just the brand. Later that afternoon, Charles called me into his office. "You made an impression," he said without looking up from his screen. "I wasn't trying to impress," I replied. "I was doing my job." He finally looked at me tired, but sharper than I'd seen him in weeks. "Some of the board members think we should keep you more involved officially." I raised an eyebrow. "And what do you think?" "I think you're dangerous," he said, voice flat, but necessary. I smiled. "You should have realized that years ago." He didn't respond, and I didn't wait for him to. The following weeks were complex. I wasn't exactly welcomed with open arms. There were murmurs in meetings. Some people thought I'd blackmailed my way back in. Others avoided me entirely, unsure of which version of the story to believe, but I didn't need their approval. I had something more important: access, oversight, and proof that I belonged. One afternoon, while reviewing audit logs, I noticed something strange. Nexus Core had flagged multiple access attempts from restricted admin accounts days after I'd returned. All of them were traced to the same department, finance. I dug deeper and found partial downloads of source code documentation, encrypted, fragmented, but unmistakably mine. I confronted Charles the next morning. "Why is someone in your finance team trying to duplicate core files?" I asked, dropping a printed log summary on his desk. He barely glanced at it. "I don't know, but I'll look into it." "No," I said, voice low. "I will?" That night, Nexus Core sent me a high-level threat notification: internal breach, risk level, critical. The system had recognized a new pattern, one I hadn't anticipated. Someone was trying to clone the platform, not destroy it, not alter it, but copy it quietly, subtly, to spin it off perhaps under a different name, one without me attached to it. Charles had signed the agreement to bring me back, but someone else still wanted me gone, this time without the theatrics. They hadn't learned the first time. But this time, I wouldn't just defend myself. I'd defend everything I'd built. And this time, I wouldn't be alone. The first rule of working in tech: trust the system, not the people. I learned that the hard way. Nexus Core had always been more than just a piece of software. It was my creation, my blueprint for intelligent protection. But now it was whispering to me in warning tones. Someone inside the company was trying to replicate its code quietly, persistently, and they were close to succeeding. The audit logs pointed to a series of encrypted data requests routed through VPN masks and disguised admin credentials. But what the intruder didn't realize was that Nexus Core didn't rely solely on access logs. It observed patterns, behavior, frequency, anomalies, and whoever was doing this wasn't careful enough. They worked after hours between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., always accessing the same folders, the same strings of code that linked to the system's neural prediction engine, the part of Nexus Core that allowed it to learn and adapt, the heart of it. I set a digital tripwire, nothing obvious, just a line of bait code nested within a documentation packet. Useless on the surface, but when touched, it triggered a silent alert that routed everything directly to me. At 2:41 a.m. that Friday morning, someone took the bait. And when the ping came through, I froze. The access credentials weren't random. They belonged to Rachel, Charles's executive assistant, the same Rachel who had called me that night after I was fired, the one who stood silently outside his office as I negotiated my return, the one who had smiled at me every morning since, like nothing had ever happened. Only now, I realized that smile had always been hiding something. The next day, I requested the full access logs tied to her account. What I found was damning. Over 40 unauthorized code pulls over the past 6 weeks, multiple download attempts masked as internal audit requests, 2 outbound data transfers sent to an unlisted domain address. But here's the part that made my blood run cold. The domain she was sending the files to didn't belong to a competitor. It belonged to Escorted Ventures, a shell subsidiary I had never heard of, but one that Charles had quietly created 3 months prior. I cross-referenced the address with our internal filings. Escorted Ventures listed Charles as the primary executive officer, and Rachel? She was listed as the co-founder. They weren't just trying to push me out again. They were trying to spin off Nexus Core behind my back, package it under a new name, strip my name from the patents, sell the clone to investors while keeping the original running just long enough to cover their tracks. This time, it wasn't corporate greed. It was theft in broad daylight. But they forgot one thing. I built the system to fight back. That night, I activated Phase 2 of the protection protocol, a kill switch hidden in the secondary authentication layer. It wasn't destructive, but it was disruptive. Every time unauthorized code was accessed, the system would flood the intruder's session with false data. Lines of fabricated algorithms, scrambled version histories, and decoy prototypes designed to look real but lead nowhere. To a thief, it would appear as if the crown jewels had been stolen. In reality, they were holding glass, and I was about to let them choke on it. The next morning, Charles summoned me to his office. His face was pale, jaw tight. "We need to talk," he said. No greeting. No pleasantries. "I assumed we would," I replied, stepping inside. He held up a tablet and rotated it toward me. On the screen, a chaos of code, broken strings, misfired scripts. What once looked like the neural engine now looked like corrupted data. "This is from the internal development backup," he said. It's scrambled. Looks like someone accessed it without proper clearance," I said, keeping my voice even. "Nexus Corp has countermeasures against unauthorized duplication." Charles stood. "Tessa, if you've sabotaged, I haven't sabotaged anything," I said. "Nexus Corp is working exactly as designed. It protects itself, even from you." His eyes narrowed. "And if I told you this has already gone too far?" he asked. "That investors were promised a new version, an expansion built under a new entity?" I tilted my head. "Then I'd say you're about to have a very uncomfortable board meeting." He stared at me, hatred creeping into his expression now. The kind that bubbles up when someone realizes they've been outplayed at their own game. "You don't get to win this," he said quietly. I smiled. "I already did. You just haven't read the source code." And with that, I walked out, leaving him to wonder which part of his empire was still real, and which parts had already crumbled under the weight of his own deception. But I wasn't done yet. The next move wasn't just about defense. It was about making sure no one could ever steal from me again. 3 days later, the board met in emergency session. It wasn't called by Charles. It was called by me. I had sent a formal report to the entire board of directors complete with evidence, access logs, security alerts, file transfer records, and documentation of the shell company, Escorted Ventures, a full-time stamped trail tracing the attempted theft of Nexus Corp source code, and the deliberate effort to cut me out. I didn't have to embellish a single word. The truth was damning enough. Charles walked into the conference room 20 minutes late. His face looked thinner, like he hadn't slept. Rachel didn't come at all. As the board reviewed the documents I'd submitted, silence filled the room. Some looked shocked, others looked unsurprised but wary. No one said a word until the last page flipped. Then board chairwoman Evelyn Sharp, a no-nonsense woman who had once called me brilliant but too quiet, folded her hands and looked directly at Charles. "Do you deny any of this?" she asked. Charles cleared his throat. Rachel acted alone. I leaned forward. "Charles is listed as the majority shareholder of Escorted Ventures. Rachel is a secondary officer. The transfers came from her account, but the project, that was his. He said nothing. Evelyn turned to me. And Nexus Core is fully operational? I nodded. The original is stable, secured, intact. The cloned instance is now flooded with decoy code and protective misdirections, irreparable. But the working system is under my direct oversight. And it can't be stolen again? One board member asked. No, I replied. Because it no longer trusts anyone without my biometric authorization. And yes, I'm happy to extend oversight to include independent verification teams moving forward. But from now on, Nexus Corp protects itself legally and technically. There was a long pause, then Evelyn closed the folder. I think it's time for a change. The vote was unanimous. Charles was removed as CEO within the hour. Rachel's employment was terminated retroactively. The shell company dissolved. The board named me interim CTO and granted me controlling interest over the future of Nexus Corp. But that wasn't what satisfied me most. What satisfied me most was that for the first time in 8 years, I didn't have to prove my worth. It was documented, sealed, recognized. I spent the next few weeks rebuilding trust where I could, with engineers, with the product team, even with the legal department who now addressed me by name, and not just the tech lead. Nexus Core's investor launch went ahead on schedule. We signed 5 major contracts in 2 weeks, including one with a global healthcare provider whose cybersecurity breaches had cost them millions the year before. I stood at the front of the stage during the product reveal, no longer a shadow behind the screen, but the face of the future. And in the final moments of the presentation, as applause rang through the room, my smartwatch buzzed with a silent notification. System status, secure, threats, neutralized, integrity, restored, protections, active. I smiled because Nexus Core wasn't just my work anymore, it was my armor. And in the months that followed, I made sure every future iteration of the platform carried the same core logic. Ethics first, ownership protected, transparency enforced. We didn't just build smarter systems. We built safer ones, not just from hackers or viruses, but from greed, from betrayal, from silence. One afternoon during a quiet moment in my office, a young developer named Mariah knocked on the door. She was new, wide-eyed, brilliant, and fresh out of grad school. She'd been assigned to one of our AI behavior modules. "Can I ask you something?" she said nervously. "How did you know when to fight, when to push back, when to walk away?" I thought about it for a long moment. "I didn't," I said honestly. "Not always. But I learned the difference between defending my ego and defending my work. And when someone tried to take what I'd built, not because they understood it, but because they thought they could, that's when I knew." Mariah nodded slowly like she was filing the words away for a time she hoped would never come. And then I added one more thing. Protect what you build, whether it's code, an idea, or your peace of mind. Not because someone will try to steal it, but because when they do, you'll be ready. And that's the message I want to leave you with. What would you do if someone tried to erase your name from something you spent years building? Would you walk away quietly, or would you find a way to make them remember? We don't always get justice in the way we imagine. But sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is stand back up, reclaim your place, and let the system you built speak for itself. Because integrity can't be stolen. It can only be protected.